The product is called Voyance because, Nyansa is difficult to pronounce. So we thought we would go with something like this. So one of the things that's always important to think about when you think about our product is user experience. So one of the ways, whenever I start a demo that a number of you have been on, is that I always say, look, the Airwave, the network management system, Aruba Airwave, Cisco Primes, we are not going to replace that. We're not going to say, hey, take your SolarWinds out and put us in. Everything that Voyance does is from the perspective of the end user. And as many of you know, we do that without agents and without sensors. So the installation is actually fairly straightforward for most environments. So user experience. So from the time Sam connects from his phone to a system, so if Matrix was running this, I see this is an Aruba shop here. So if Sam connects here at Matrix, we know your user experience. So whether that user experience is good or bad, you get on an application, we can say, look, Sam had a poor Skype experience. But then Voyance takes it the next level and says, here's why. So one of the ways I kind of couch this, you guys know I'm a marketing guy, I couch this as Voyance is like the next person we want you to hire in your IT staff. If you think about someone who just sits there, looks at everything that goes on your network 24/7, 365, and says, I have figured some things out. What I figured out is that some users are having some problems, and oh, by the way, I think I have a recommended solution for that. So when you look at that individual user experience, that's really helpful. And when we talk more about workflows here in a little bit, you'll see how knowing the individual user experience is really helpful to workflow. But what about the entire network? Some of these are not resolving well up on the screen here, but it's okay. You take all the user experiences together. Now, if you're a really large organization, that may be multiple locations. So I want to look at maybe one location versus the other. But all the experience comes and creates what we call a baseline. Now, the idea of a baseline, I would have to explain that for 5 or 10 minutes a year ago. Today, you guys have probably heard the word baseline 2 or 3 times just in other presentations. But the idea is what is normal for your network. The goal of a baseline is a lot, but the biggest goal is so you don't have to set an SLA. Many of us, if you guys remember the old WIDS and WIPS days, it was 2, 3, 4 years of tuning. I was going to say months, but I was more realistic. To get that system to really start working for you in your network. Today, that isn't the case. With Voyance, and again, anything that does a baseline, it's like, okay, that's the normal for your network. Tell me when something is different. So Voyance has an idea of what's an amount of badness that's happening on your network. If something changes, you may want to let me know. We call that an incident. Now, something that took me a little bit to wrap my head around that Anand had to beat me up about was that there's always incidents on a network. It's just how big of a deal is that incident. So for example, people are having DNS congestion. Right? Now, by the way, don't just think of us as a Wi-Fi solution. We're looking at all network services, radius, DNS, DHCP, et cetera. So let's say DNS has 3% of the people on your network have DNS congestion. That 3% is a normal amount. That is on your network, but that may be a really low number. We're going to say that's a P5. That's a really low priority. But if that problem expands, the blast radius of that problem has increased, the incident has not changed. The problem is identical. The difference is more people are having that problem. That's something you likely care about. Is I need to be able to take action because normally 3% of badness, now I have 10, 15, 20%. I want to be notified about that. So again, think of Voyance as this technician that sits here and says, hey boss, normally I'm seeing 3%, now I'm seeing 15. That's an issue. So, but what it's going to do is it's going to say, Keith, my boss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah.
My paycheck didn't come through like I expected, but we'll talk about that. It's an annual subscription. Guys, I like how I work that in. So I'm going to tell you, not only am I going to say, Keith, is there a problem? I'm going to say, look, here's the symptoms. I've done some research. Here are the symptoms that I've come up with. These 5 things are working well. These 2 are really not. And because of that, I've determined that this is the root cause. Now, this is where you're going to see a lot of evolution in analytics. Today, we're pretty good at it. I'm not saying that everything you'll see in these last 2 is perfect, but you will see this start to get from, we're narrowing it from here to here, And as things continue to evolve, as we get more data sources in the network, it'll start coming to here. For example, Skype for Business, Cisco UCM, we have APIs into that. We can get down really finite with that. And as Anand and his team get a lot more data sources in, it's going to get stupid crazy how that detail will come up. The next is, how do you know if your network is bad? If I tell you, a lot of you are familiar with this example I use. If I say, you sir, I know your name, I just can't remember it now.
Mitch.
Mitch. So Mitch, if I tell you that 0.2% of all your ARP traffic is failing, are you happy or sad about that?
Sad.
Sad?
Yeah.
0.2%.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
0.2%.
Yeah, 0.2%. That's good.
Well, the answer is that you're like, okay, that's good, but is it?
But could be better.
Because no one. I mean, how many of you have ever done ARP analysis? Yeah, as part of your monthly work. I said monthly.
Every day.
Right, exactly. People don't really do that. You know what an interesting statistic is? Number one problem on networks today, Wi-Fi. Right? No, not blowing your mind here. Number two is ARP. We do things where we'll show you this, how bad your ARP is because we tell you that compared to other organizations. That's how you know. Is that Voyance will say, hey, look, your ARP is here, but there's 10 other companies that are better than you. So that 0.2% may not seem like much to you, but there's a lot of people that are doing it perfectly. Maybe there's a bunch doing 0%. So we measure your performance on again, all these services we've talked about, application performance from the user perspective. Remember, when I say app performance, we're not an application, analytics tool in the back end of your data center. We're going to tell you how the users are experiencing your application. So compare your organization to others, but also intra-organization. For those of you that have customers with multiple locations, how do each one of my locations compare to each other? Because that will start, saying some hot spots. So the ARP thing, by the way, is really interesting. We'll see some companies with like 50%. That 50% ARP, this is not ARP delay, this is ARP failure. ARP request goes out, no response. By the way, the other sales pitch here that we can do is we'll tell you with one click where on the network that's having the biggest problem. It'll say, here's what we call most affected. Here's the most affected location on your campus. So kind of nifty. So what this does is when you compare yourself to other organizations is it helps you allocate resources. So if you go to your boss and say, hey, look, we're in the bottom 20th percentile for radius performance, you have a much better chance of getting money when you point to a third-party tool that says, hey, go do this. As a complete aside, if I were to start a reseller today, I would actually put Voyance in every one of my customers if I could afford it. And the reason is because Voyance actually tells you, here's everything that's going wrong with this customer. And there's some resellers in the room, and that can be kind of scary because it tells you everything that's wrong with that customer, right? There's some upsides and downsides to that. The other is, and I know I say this every year that I talk to you guys, but it's still one of the things I continue to see in Voyance that I love. How many of you have ever made a change to the Wi-Fi network and thought you did a good job?
Every time.
Every time.
Yep.
Right? Every time you make a change, you're like, you know what? I've learned it. I've got my certifications. I read these books. Pretty sure I did something good.
Best decision ever.
Right. How many of you have ever quantified it? Like, yeah, you can. Right? There's some ways to quantify. If it's really a big one, right? It's like, hey, it was, retry rate was 35%, now it's 5, you're a rock star, right? But as you make these small changes in Wi-Fi especially, you know that this is very difficult to track. Voyance does it. So every time you make a change on your Wi-Fi network, Voyance automatically will annotate that and say, Mitch made a change, he shut down low data rates. Did that positively or negatively affect the network? It tells you right there. You have a 7% increase in user performance because of what you did. It's like, well, it's nice. It makes you feel good about yourself. Now start thinking about that in the same respect of comparing your network.
Well, what if the byproduct is, hey, you disabled low data rates, everything below, I don't know, everything below
18,
72 megabits per second.
Okay.
And now you've knocked off 5% of your clients.
Okay.
What's the response when my clients aren't connecting? How do we visualize that? And yes, you turn off low data rates, but what if you turn off too many low data
Sure.
rates? Right? There's a balance.
The way Voyance would look at that is it would actually notice that the loads have changed. I don't, Anand, maybe you can chime in if I'm wrong here, but so if you all of a sudden had 10% fewer clients on the network, Voyance is going to notice that there's a baseline delta there. So every baseline that Voyance does is always against a load. So one of the analogies I always use is that if you decide to come out here, if you're like, hey, dude, what do you think of Palo Alto, where we're headquartered? Say, man, if you want to drive there, it's great. At 2 a.m., the traffic's perfect. You're like, okay, that's useless information. Yeah. So we don't show you the load of your network when there's 10% of the people on there. We're going to show you what your performance is at 60, 90 percentiles, which is, and all those numbers are right on the screen when you see it.
Absolutely.
So again, being able to, and again, don't just think of these annotations being for just Wi-Fi. Maybe an example I use, being from a former vendor. You ever wanted to bake off vendors before? You can do that. You can actually swap vendors. We've had customers do that, that'll remain unnamed, that they did a bake-off and just see who had better user performance with Voyance doing the analysis.
Not on theirs, just comparing to other.
On?
Oh, they actually used Voyance and had installs.
Great, they had installs, right? Yep, they were doing like pre and post. A lot of people do pre and post validation as far as performance validation, not site survey validation. But again, don't just think of Wi-Fi. Someone swaps out just APs, I know that's Wi-Fi. You can annotate that. Or what if they change DNS providers? You can see the difference. Or increases the WAN speed. How did that affect positively, hopefully, the end network? Any questions or thoughts more on this slide? I know it's like one slide it kind of acts like 20.
So how do you answer the question when people say, but you don't have sensors looking at the RF?
The truth is, if, as much as I love CAPE and 7 Signal, we would sell sensors. We would be in the sensor business too if we thought that we could approach you and say, Lee, we would love for you to buy our product, and you're going to need 1,000 sensors or 500 sensors. If you would cut a check for that, we'll start doing it today.
But throw the marketing out of it and go back to the technical argument, though. Somebody says, well, I don't think you can deliver what I need because you're not looking at the RF.
Okay. Anand, do you want to? I have some answers, but I'll let you take that.
Absolutely. So I think there are definitely places where a sensor can give you data that the infrastructure just can't give you, right? So if it's a specific type of problem where only a sensor is going to give you that data and you have to use that, then absolutely you guys should, or you need to buy a sensor then, or potentially, take a laptop there and do Wireshark or whatever it is, and actually look at those packets and do that analysis. As we'll kind of talk about, there's a lot of data just in your infrastructure itself. And by taking that data and analyzing it a certain way, you can solve the same kind of problems that you might have thought before, no, I need a sensor to do this, or I need air magnet to do this, or something like that. But I'm sure there are going to be cases, like corner cases, where that's not the case. And if so, then absolutely, then a sensor is valuable.
Well, part two of that question is, after what we've heard yesterday and today, analytics, to your point, JT, or GT, everything is analytics, right? Now, that's the big story. Are you guys contemplating partnerships with anybody who's doing sensor stuff, or?
Yes. We hadn't even thought about it until we saw Drew and the Cape Network leave.
Exactly.
No, we've talked about it. There's work to be done there.
Yep.
Again, we're not anti-sensor as a company. We just had to make some decisions early on as to what route to go.
Yep.
The other thing that on Lee's topic here is that, and I would love for you guys to tell me I'm wrong. I've just kind of been positing this with guys like Marcus Burton and some of the people you guys may know. I start to feel like an analytics platform will make you guys will be doing, Wi-Fi professionals will be doing less frame analysis. But when you do, it will be more targeted. Because today, a lot of times I think what you guys do, again, I used to do when I was actually a Wi-Fi person, there's a problem. What tools do we have available, right? A Fluke scanner, some other tools out there that are good analysis tools, or we pull out frame analysis, some sort of frame analysis tool. That's kind of the only hammer we've had for a long time. I think what we're going to see is this transition of, you're still going to do frame analysis, but you're going to do it less often. In fact, I was talking to Anand earlier about this, and I asked him, what is a good example of how analytics has changed? Analytics is going to change IT in some major ways. That's our prediction, and we hope to be a big part of that. What else are things that have happened in technology like that? And Anand actually mentioned Splunk. If for those more of the server guys, right? But looking at server logs and going to one server and grepping and looking over and over and over again. And then you have a tool that all of a sudden will just bring a lot of that up for you and make it much more accessible, has changed a lot of the ways people do that. And we think that actually probably even to a bigger degree that you'll see that happening with network and analytics. So again, this is, what is it that we do? We get data from 3 data sources. One is the Wi-Fi controller. Today we support Aruba proper, not Instant, and Cisco proper, not Meraki. So controller-based solutions from those 2. That will not be where we stop with vendor integration. We are working with other vendors, and that's twofold. Our engineering team has to get their data, and the other is they need to be able to give us the right data. It's not just, we can't get Linksys isn't going to give us that information. We have to have a lot of rich data to do what we do. The other is APIs. I mentioned Skype for Business, Cisco UCM as data sources that we use today. Again, we're continuing to expand the API support. And the third is deep packet inspection. Packet inspection, the deep is maybe not always correct, from layer 2. At a bare minimum, since we are used for Wi-Fi quite a lot, we want to see all the tunneled data from the controller. So off that 10 gig port, we want to see all that.
So do we have access to those captures as well? I know you're grabbing them, but do we have access to say to download what you have so we can? We
do not do that today. Okay. Number one, we don't send that data to our cloud. So that data all sits on the crawler, which is what we call this little thing right here. It is technically possible, but then the storage requirements and the hardware requirements of that box are going to go up, and that's, it's, I would say, not on our roadmap necessarily.
Probably not.
But if you guys present a lot of use cases, Anand's the guy who can kind of wave his magic wand and start making it happen. So with all those data sources and increasing, roadmap data sources that we have coming out, the more you start putting that together, the crawler takes all that data and just turns it into metrics. So what leaves here is about, I don't know the percentage, for every gigabit per second that processes locally, we send 500K to the cloud. We also have private cloud options now. So that's something, a number of things we've released. One of them is a private cloud. You will prefer our public cloud. There's some reasons behind that. But generally speaking, for customers that we have already that want private, the product is there for that. Questions on this architecture and kind of what we do to get our data?
One question, and I know it's probably not easily answered, but given how close you are to the controller, and given how problematic controller code can be, have you ever considered going down the road of using what you see to try to alert users to, hey, this is a bug-like behavior from known vendor bugs?
Anand?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, one of the things we want to be careful about.
You can do it.
We'll do it by you. We'll have Lee put that information out for us. No, we want to make sure that there's enough data, but absolutely, because we see changes happen, any kind of configuration change, whether it's an upgrade, whether it's a configuration change in the controller, or anything like that. And we see the before and after of everybody's baseline, right? And so if there are enough baselines that have gone down or gone up in this case, right, in terms of performance getting worse, in response to a particular upgrade, the data is there to say, you know what, this upgrade may not be good. We've seen cases where it's not just for Wi-Fi, like DHCP issues happen after a controller upgrade,
sure,
right? And so the DHCP baseline goes awry after this happens. We just want to make sure that if we're going to do that, we're like 120% right before we do it.
So it's not a code upgrade situation, but it's a scale problem. Some of these controllers are massive. They serve, they accommodate thousands of APs and dozens of thousands of clients. So let's say you reach above 25,000 clients, and all of a sudden a bug is triggered because of scale.
Yeah.
And it's a known, published bug. You know, I'm envisioning, okay, we're aware of the code, somehow aware of the code version on the thing, and we have access to bug libraries, blah, blah, blah. Sound an alert because this is a known identified behavior from the manufacturer. Again, maybe it's half thought out, but it sounds wonderful from where I sit.
So I saw an advisory.
Yeah, so that we already do.
Yeah, we kind of do that already. I saw an advisory, actually for the first time, a Cisco, sorry, I wasn't supposed to say that. I mean, it was a known Cisco advisory.
Published it.
Right, it was a published advisory from Cisco.
Yeah.
And I saw it correlate with a customer, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Where if I log into one customer, I won't see it, but another customer has that because Voyance is making that connection that somehow that behavior is related.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Sure. By the way, the sales pitch side of this is our typical customer, if you have to put in one crawler, is 30 to 60 minutes. SNMP or AMON, depending on the vendor, span port, couple IP addresses set, and then you let that box sit. The scalability, I can't ever say infinite because that's ridiculous, but I am in marketing. It's infinite. Okay? And I say that too if you have, we have customers that basically have, I think 30 of these in their data center. They're all VM-based. These, in this particular customer, are VM-based. They just have all of these in a set of VMs in one place. But when you log into that customer and see their interface, it's just one interface. Meaning the relationship between crawler and site or location is not one-to-one. Does that part make sense? So we have a hardware box that we ship if you want it. It does 20 gigabits line rate. It's a Dell box. We're not a hardware company. If you guys want to build your own, we don't care. We charge $2,500 for it. Again, we're not an appliance company. But if you need, I've gone beyond 20 gigabits, I need another one, rack another one in, do the exact same thing. You don't change anything else. Question, sir?
Me?
Yep.
No, I was just curious about the crawler a little bit. Can you go a little bit deeper into the hardware side of it, or like just a deeper dive in what it's doing on the network, just gathering the data and then feeding it into the cloud analytics engine, I guess? Yeah,
and it's really, Anand has disagreed when I said this before, but let's say you had an infinite WAN pipe, we wouldn't need a crawler. You just ship everything over the WAN, and then we just do it all in the cloud, right? I mean, so that's not a realistic thing to say, but we have to have something to turn that data. Number one, from a security perspective, you guys would kill us. So we're taking all of that, turning into metrics, we drop all the data packets, and then that is what gets sent. This, what I call low bit rate secure metrics get sent up. But the crawler, we have another form factor now, by the way, which is it's a little appliance from us. So if you have branch offices, you don't have to rack in this big machine or spin up a VM. It's cheap and, again, it's a 1U thing, so less than 1U. You put it in, it's good for 200 megabits per second of span data, which is actually pretty decent for a little branch office. It's a lot of data.
Yeah, so I mean, one click down on that, right, is just what it's doing is it's taking live data. Of course, it's also taking data from the wireless and from application servers and all that kind of stuff. But the wire data, what it's doing is it's mainly focused on identifying every client accessing an application at any given time. What's the performance that client sees on that application, right? And sort of tying those metrics sort of to a specific time so it can be correlated later on. The other big thing it's doing is it's keeping a state machine about every client's connectivity. So basically, okay, this client, we saw it past radius, we saw it past DHCP. Let's give it some time to see if it'll successfully go through DNS. Let's give it some more time to see if it successfully transmits a packet out to the web. The crawler is doing all of that. But the key thing, to GT's point, is it's stateless. So it doesn't actually store any data on it. It just does this processing and then ships that data to.
And then all the bringing it all together is done up in the cloud.
Exactly. Yep. Either your private cloud or the public cloud. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Good question. Yep. Anybody else? Okay. One of the things I will say that I would go with, what are some of the challenges that we have? I would say one of our challenges is that it's one of those challenges like, well, I'm really too nice. Like that's one of those ridiculous problems. In an interview, you say, oh, I'm too nice of a person. One of our challenges is that we think we have a positive effect on every part of an IT network, of an IT organization. That sounds like you're really, patting ourselves on the back. The problem with that is that it's actually quite difficult to get every one of them to change how they do business. Because Voyance does have the power to do that, and that's That's why I think not just Voyance, but other analytics platforms can be revolutionary in how we're going to see networks worked on 5 years from now, maybe even sooner than that. On the support side, where do you see it? And so Anand is going to do a demo, and I want you to think through kind of workflows. When Anand does the demos after this slide, he's going to go through this same process of how does a workflow happen from the perspective. And this, for those of you that haven't talked to us before, this is new to us. We're kind of exploring this new way to look at Voyance as more and more features come out. So one of the things that's important for just a support organization is go back in time. Right? It sounds like a really simple thing, but it's really important. If you have a problem, Blake calls in and says, hey, I was so busy, I couldn't call in yesterday. Well, normally an IT organization will have to say, I mean, what do? They go, if it's a Wi-Fi problem, they go and do a site survey, they do some packet analysis because they feel like they want to work on it. But the reality is it was a transient issue. Has it happened more than once? Maybe. Blake, is anyone else around you having the problem? I got to ask you a bunch of questions. Right? Maybe there's interference with the guy to your left. You never know. So,
Never mind.
He was pointing at me. I didn't do it. So the support organizations we have started to work with, we typically talk to network ops, and network engineering is kind of our point of entry of who we talk to. But the support organization, in my mind, has just as much positive effect from this. And the other is root cause analysis. We've talked about that before, but very simply on the screen it's saying, this client is having a Wi-Fi problem. This client is having a DNS server issue. Those kind of things help you with your escalations. I say cleaner escalations because number one, you can transfer, we are doing some integration with ticketing systems. That's some reasonable roadmap ahead. But for now, if I just send Mitch a link and say, hey, I'm a tech guy, I'm a support guy, I was having a problem, here's the link, you will see exactly what I saw in Voyance. And you go, okay, GT, you made a good decision. This is a server thing. I understand why you did that. And instead of yelling at me and saying, dude, you're just a support guy and why are you throwing everything over the fence? I mean, that really happens a lot in an IT organization. The next is network ops. And again, to kind of transition here is a cohesive escalation process coming from the support team to the network ops that, hey, when I get something from them, that I can trust that they use a tool that is giving them more information than just throwing their hands in the air, which unfortunately happens a lot. The odd thing that I have found, the larger the organization, the fewer the tools. And that seems kind of odd or backwards. And what I've seen is because a lot of tools, to deploy them network-wide, is millions and millions of dollars. So where that may be easier for a smaller organization, that is throw tools at the problem. Large organizations have to be much more judicial because it's a $20 million tool if you want to deploy it to all your branches or all your sites or to your entire campus. So a network ops person, they're sitting there thinking, what is wrong with my network right now because I need to go put some fires out. What fires do I have? Voyance, again, is giving you everything that happens to an end user or obviously a group of end users. So that's an incident. Remember, an incident is something is risen by default to a P2 or a P1 is our default. You're going to get an alert on that, and then you're going to take action, which is I want to view those incidents, and I want to know the root cause, and it helps you solve those problems. The next is network engineering. So some of those are the same people, but again, some of the organizations we deal with, this was kind of new to me, it's totally different groups, people that are designing and people that are supporting. So finding problem hotspots. Again, I mentioned this before. Where on your campus do you have the worst Wi-Fi coverage? Does any of you know that right now? Probably, maybe, in your business. Voyance will say, here's where it's worst. It will list it. Here's the worst locations for wireless from the perspective of the end user. But it also does what I mentioned earlier for ARP. So we get, you guys are going to ask this, where do we get locations from? From the controller. So AP groups are what we pull in, AP locations, but you can create your own. So if you're not happy with the groups, then you can create them dynamically and say, okay, I want to just analyze this group, and I want data off, I want a baseline for that group of APs. All that, you just build that nice and simple. Configuration optimization. I was at a customer, and I said, hey, look, you guys should really consider going to 20 megahertz wide channels, right? I mean, I pretend to be a Wi-Fi guy on occasion. Felt like the right thing to do. They made that change in a building. Performance went better, up, down. It's actually down in a baseline. Okay, fewer incidents happen. They said, that's great. They go deploy it wide, campus-wide. So that's an example of let's figure out, see if something is better, and then apply it. And then system validation. I don't really know what that means. I just kind of put that in this morning. No, I mean validating what.
Sounds good.
I think it sounds great. Things like making sure that your system is, an example is, am I using my access points appropriately? Do I have my best APs in my highest density areas? And then recommendations. I've lost, my bullets are. Recommendations. This is something that Anand's going to talk about more that is fairly new to the product. In fact, he's going to show you a beta version, right?
Yep.
What we call a recommendation engine. If I use the analogy I used earlier where Keith was my boss and I was an IT tech sitting there, now I'm a lot of you, I'm a consultant. Voyance comes in and says, I've analyzed your network. These are the 5 things I would recommend. Voyance is now doing that in a beta version and will continue to get more detailed. And the last is your IT leadership. They're going to ask for reports. They want to know, I've invested a bunch of money. Did things improve? If so, show me the report. I want a graph on that. A lot of those are built in. A lot of them are not. What we're finding is a lot of that has to be customized, but the data is sitting there. Everything in Voyance, not everything, most things in Voyance can be exported out. So sometimes for customers, I'll export something and then create some correlations for a report that's important to them. For example, if you have a customer with an application that's just theirs, how's that application been performing? Where is it being adopted widely, et cetera? Blake, what you thinking, man?
Oh, I like it.
Okay.
I like workflows.
Good.
I like that you're thinking about it from the entire approach. And how do I provide the data and step through all the steps with the data to help the next levels up until you finally get to the end result.
Cool. This is really the first time we've ever presented this. Is there, we're kind of paying you guys a little bit, so any thoughts? Or you're my consultant now.
I just need to start beta in it and see it.
You want to see it?
Yeah.
I knew you guys were going to get to that.
Yeah. Well, before we see it, I would say my only fear with anything is, back to we're not at the RF. I just hope that we're not saying Wi-Fi problem for things that aren't Wi-Fi problems. Especially when you say put it in the hands of the help desk, and now tickets are being created, So I guess I'm just saying accuracy counts.
Yep. And that's the first thing to get hammered every time. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Is there documentation? This is a nice story, but physical flow charts, the work help pieces that they, a page, documentation, training on it. There's a nice story, and you're really good at telling stories, but somebody's going to actually have to sit down and spend the hours.
We're not going to make this usable.
Oh, okay.
It's just marketing. So what would you like to see in that? We're doing training videos. Me, I like to do training videos. And
what I see in enterprises is what they need more is paper documentation that an HR person could actually understand, not a technical person.
Okay.
And then they can assign it to say that we should be going through this. Training videos is just more of you talking, and not. I know it's a small percentage, but not everyone learns by listening to you talk.
No, I think it's a bigger percentage than I would like to admit, but no, completely agree. And there's some
that especially when you go to larger enterprises, documentation is where it's at. And so every one of these steps also has to go through a change cycle and get approvals and everything. So how you're going to merge into those other pieces?
Can I talk advanced workflow or advanced roadmap?
Maybe, what's that?
Let's just say we're addressing that.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to be happy with it.
Yeah.